This is a video from our spiritual warfare series. It's kind of a side note to my Passion for Prayer series. The Lord, He just reveals things to me, and I like to get them out when I'm passionate about it, so I hope you don't mind me skipping around. If you're viewing and hoping for the Passion for Prayer, it is coming. I have a few videos that I'm waiting to be edited, but the Lord's been talking to me the past couple days about suppressive and oppressive spiritual warfare and the nature of that, and how we can see it on a wide scale and how we can see it on a minor scale. And a couple days ago, a friend of mine was complaining to me about someone in her life that seems to always have negative things to say to her, uses every situation she can to poke at her or put her down, or and anytime she tries to choose good for her life, this person, talks bad about it and how her way's better, and yada yada. And because I love my friend, I had to really wrestle with and wonder, like, why does this person do that to her? And just praying through it, and God was showing me about suppressive and oppressive spirits. And one of the first things to remember, and if you've seen my other videos, you know that in spiritual warfare, it is so important to remember that it's not that person, it's what's coming against them. If we look at the flesh, that what we see in front of us, and we think it's that person, we begin to build up hatred and unforgiveness. But when we remember that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, we start, instead of hatred, we build a righteous anger, and then we start to use the tools that God gave us to win that war, which is through prayer and fasting and things like that. And so we have to remember it's not that person, it's what's coming against them. And so the Lord showed me that first. He said, remember, it's not that person, it's what's coming against her. And secondly, that this kind of spirit stems from fears and insecurities in this own person. And while they play on the fleshly insecurities, that's not really what the Spirit is dealing with. He said, greater is He that is within me than he that's in the world. And I thought, you're right. So what that Spirit's trying to do is suppress the good inside of my friend, and I'm sure this has happened to other people. It's happened to me. I can look at situations in my life where I felt like, man, no matter what I do, no matter where I go, there's something puts a blockage in my way, trying to put me down, trying to keep me down, trying to press me down, trying to keep me from winning, trying to keep me from succeeding. And sometimes that's our own issue. Sometimes that's us, and we get in the way of ourselves, and we're not leaning into God. But other times it's definitely spiritual warfare that gets in the way. And so God was pointing out, He was saying, the spirit that is within her fears her recognizing the valuable gifts and the valuable spirit that lives within her. And so he was showing me, he said, this is something that's been going on for generations on a wide scale and on a minor scale. And so He took me to the wide scale in the Bible, gave me a biblical example, and we can find that in Exodus chapter 1. This is where the Israelites were made slaves. They were enslaved by the Egyptians. And I want to point out a couple passages. You can read it, Exodus chapter 1. I believe it's 7 through 19. We're just going to point out a few important things. I wouldn't mind me reading it from my Bible. It says, verse 7, but the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. And so you can see there was success happening, there's multiplying happening, there was fruition taking place, right? Now there arose a new king in Egypt, okay, and he wasn't happy about this. We look down in verse 9, and he said to his people, look, the children of Israel are more and mightier than us. So he's afraid. He's got some insecurities going on. And he says, come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happened in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us. So he was afraid that they were going to outgrow them, team up with their enemies, and destroy them. So his fear of becoming destroyed caused him to seek out and oppress and suppress the Israelites. Okay, so he said, therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And so it goes on and says, in verse 12, he said, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So then the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve them with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. And so the Lord was showing me, He said that spirit exists today. That spirit goes on today. And when we respond out of fear, out of insecurity or whatever it is, and it's so much deeper than, you know what, well, I'm afraid that she's prettier than me, or I'm afraid, you know, he's more successful than me. Those are the things that spirit working in us gets us to believe. But the truth of the matter is that the Egyptians were not believers of God. They had their own gods, and what they were truly afraid of in the supernatural realm, the spirits were afraid of God's people becoming successful. They were afraid of God's people becoming fruitful and multiplying, and then winning. Okay, so we can see how that spirit takes place today, and how, you know, maybe you're that person. Maybe you've felt like in your life, you know what, every time I start to succeed, you know, I feel like I'm placed in bondage again. There's hurdles put in front of me every time I get up. You know, look at what Jesus endured. Look at what the disciples endured. Every time Paul woke up in the morning, you know, and God would say, go over here and preach the gospel. It wasn't like he, you know, paid his money to go on the boat and went over and everything was fine. No, he suffered. He had to persevere. There were obstacles set up for him continuously to try to stop, to try to suppress God's work, to try to suppress God's word that was going forth, right? And so we can see that. But what I'd like to point out is verse 14. That God really showed me how verse 14, it says, the more that they oppressed them, the more that they afflicted them, the more fruitful they became, and the more they grew. Now, he's talking in numbers there, of course, but we can use that. And God was saying, we need a stubborn faith. We need a stubborn faith, and a faith that is sure of itself, not in a prideful way, but in a confident manner, knowing that greater is He that's within me than he that's in the world, and pressing on, pressing towards the mark, no matter what affliction comes our way, and continuing to grow, continuing to multiply, continuing to become fruitful, and not caring about the afflictions and the burdens that are laid on us, but prevailing, succeeding, manifesting God's works, right? And not looking to the left or to the right. And so I just want to encourage you to have a stubborn faith. I want to encourage you that if you are feeling suppressed, if you are feeling oppressed, and you feel like there's hurdles always in front of your path, and you're trying, just keep pressing in. That day's coming. I look at Joseph in the Bible, and I remember one time the Lord pointing that out to me. Look at the oppression and the suppression that he faced. I mean, he was sold into slavery by his brothers. Then he was cast into prison for things that he didn't even do. But he leaned into God, and God was able to use those times, turn them around for his good. And then, you know what? There was, in God's perfect timing, he rose him up, and he made him leader of those people. Nothing, no matter what the enemy tried. You know, remember Joseph had the dream when he was really young that his brothers would bow down to him. And you'd think, by looking at every single piece of his life, all the destruction, all the obstacles, all the sufferings that he went through, you'd think God did not come close to keeping that promise. But in the end, no matter what the enemy threw at him, no matter how suppressive, God had his way. God's will was done, and God's promise was kept to Joseph, and his brothers did come and bow down to him. So God is a promise keeper, and no matter what the enemy throws at you, the righteous are always pursued, the righteous are always trying to, the enemy is always trying to suppress God's chosen. So just keep pressing on, keep pushing through, and there's going to come a day when God is going to raise you up